So the big news that everyone is talking about with regards to YouTube is the recent round of demonetizations and new content policy guidelines that the company has put out. Now, this has largely come about as a result of public pressure, pressure from the US government, and probably most importantly, pressure from advertisers. Now, YouTube has created a set of new rules, and these ones are unique in that they are very specific. They give direct examples like such group, X group, is worth having less rights because they are in some perception inferior, or X group is a problem and they must be gotten rid of. In other words, what is very clearly hate speech, advocating less rights for one group for another, or the extermination of one group for another. I mean, this is pretty much straight up anti-hate speech, and it is something that really any reasonable person couldn't be against. Now, one of the victims so far is Steven Crowder. Now, while he has been allowed to continue his presence on YouTube, he is now no longer monetized. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. See, the problem with Steven Crowder is he keeps attacking people based on their race and their sexual orientation. That's the problem. Now, if you could formulate an argument against people or ideas without resorting to such ad hominems, he probably would be okay. But again, he's only one example. Now, let's look at this another way. What is being essentially claimed is that there is a leftist bias in this censorship. Now, I will say, for the record, that is wholly incorrect. What there is a bit of a liberal bias. Now, let me explain this. There is not a conspiracy against conservatives to censor them. Now, that's really what they believe in this case. But let's look really at what's going on. Capitalism needs things to function as smoothly as possible in order to make money. In other words, social anxieties and antagonisms down, purchasing up. Now, there are certain barriers to that, certain contradictions within capitalism that creates the problems that run antagonistic to this desire for smooth sailing. One of those things would be racial inequality. Now, it's very obvious that you cannot get rid of racial inequality in capitalism. You cannot expect equality in a system that is dedicated, predicated upon, and promotes inequality. But capitalism would like there to not be hostilities. You can have all the inequality you want. They're happy with it. What they don't like is people being unhappy with it. And certain people who make that situation worse, people like Steven Crowder and the actual philosophical basis for conservatism, that's what they don't like. It's not the inequality that they don't like. It's the social antagonisms that appear as a result. People being angry and demanding change. And that making it more difficult for the representatives in government, the real representatives of the bourgeoisie, to carry out their job. So that's really what this is about. It's about public anger at it. And this public anger doesn't just create powerful motivators to create real positive change. It also creates people like the New Zealand shooter. People like Dylan Roof. Like people who go in and shoot places up because of whatever particular circumstances cause them to be that way, whether they just be insane or they are just so extremely hateful they do something like this. What the system wants is for people not to walk into places and start shooting it up, because it's not good for business. It's not good for the general public to feel this way, because it harms profits. As little social anxiety as possible with maximum consumer purchasing. That's really what the system wants. They want the shootings to stop because it doesn't benefit them. That's when you start getting into the conspiracy theory kind of idea that it's all a justification to take the guns away. Now, they only really want to take the guns away because people are unhappy with the system. Whether that be racial inequality, perceived conspiracies against the public, or class antagonism. Now, the bourgeoisie wouldn't want to take their guns away if they didn't feel that there was a problem. Other than that, they'd just be happy to sell them. So what I'm really saying is, when it comes to making certain social phenomena worse, you're looking at conservatives, because they're the ones that are causing more of a problem. They're causing the violent problem, and that people going in, shooting up places, etc. Now that's what they want to censor, which is why another big part of it is about censoring conspiracy theory nonsense, which also generates a kind of hysteria, a kind of anti-government hysteria that's based on nonsense. Even if what a conspiracy theorist says was 100% true, they would still be getting censored. Now, they think they're getting censored because they're right. They're not. They're getting censored because what they're doing is causing a problem, whether they're right or wrong. It's creating more anti-government, kind of crazy right-wing sentiment. Now, all of this clearly is on the conservative side, because it is the conservatives that are a problem. Now, there's a reason why there's not a massive censorship of the left. And that's basically because the left isn't a problem. The left, the vast majority of the American left, is in league with the system, whether that be identity politics, intersectionalism, not even calling for revolution, but calling for regular social democratic reforms that they're going to get out of Bernie Sanders and AOC, etc. In other words, the threat of violence from leftists is tremendously insignificant to the threat of violence coming from conservatives. Now, that's not even necessarily a critique of how bad conservatives must be, but how weak leftists are. The system isn't worried about us the way that they're worried about conservatives, because conservatives will cause a hell of a lot of problems, far more than the left will. And not so much the liberals. The liberals are just fully in line with the system, etc. But leftists, like actual leftists, are not that big of a problem, because most of the leftists in the country are already lining up behind the system under social democratic reforms. The real threat of terror and violence comes from the right, and that should be very obvious. It is not that there is a bias against conservatives. There is a bias against radicalism, and that radicalism is growing 10 times faster on the right than it is on the left. You would have seen much more radicalism out of the left after 2008 than you would see out of the right now. And that's largely thanks to Donald Trump emboldening much of the alt-right. So this isn't a conspiracy against the right, it's that the right is a far bigger problem than the left, and that actually makes us, the left, look bad. And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind here. That it's not this conspiracy, but rather something that is wrong with us in general, that we are not seen as a threat to the system, but far-right ideology very much is. And I think that's the real truth. Now, some people have the idea that we should be sticking up for the conservatives. We should be sticking up for the right and protect them from censorship, because once they come after them, they're going to come after us. Well, the problem with this view is, as soon as the left becomes anything significant enough to be a threat to the system, they will censor us anyway. That's the point here. It doesn't matter if we throw ourselves on the sacrificial altar of Alex Jones to protect him from getting criticized, or to stop the censorship of right-wing extremist ideas. Like, by saving them, we're not saving ourselves. Like, this is nonsense. You get censored when you're a problem, and we are not a problem. If we were to become a threat to the system, then we certainly would be censored. And as you'll notice, the right doesn't really care. I mean, they don't have to reciprocate. I mean, that's them not reciprocating that kind of protection is not even relevant to this discussion. What's relevant is the fact that we're going to get censored anyway. That's coming as soon as the left becomes large enough to be a problem. So don't even waste your time trying to protect the right. Theoretically, you could radicalize the left even more, but that would be against the rules. That's something you can't say on YouTube. You can't say to take the far left or the far right and radicalize them. That's something you're not allowed to do. So I'm saying, theoretically, if there was to be a problem, it would be because the left was more radical, and thus pose a threat to the system. So there really is no point trying to sacrifice yourself or stand up for the right. I mean, it's just nonsense. It's literally not productive in any way, shape, or form, and it will not solve the problem when it comes to us in general. But here's the thing that I'm worried about. One of the provisions in there about the new rules is denying certain events or calling people crisis actors. Now, the crisis actors thing is complete BS. There's no such thing as crisis actors. This is conspiracy theory nonsense. And to hell with those people for being stupid anyway. Here's my problem. Now, no rational person is going to deny the Holocaust. And I certainly understand the desire to censor someone who questions the Holocaust, because it very clearly did happen, etc. And it is, for the most part, hate speech to deny that it happened. But what happens if you deny other events? What if, say, you said the Holodomor was not a gigantic plot by Stalin to kill millions and millions of people because he didn't like them because for some reason? What if you wanted to say that, well, it was a heat wave that destroyed grain that swept through several countries? It just happened to hit Ukraine worse than others. And this was not some kind of a plot, but literally just a weather pattern that was exacerbated by landlords that were hoarding grain, slaughtering animals, and even burning crops. What does that count as? Does that count as denying a crime? Does that count as denying a great tragedy of history? To simply point out that, well, the Soviet population grew during the time that supposedly 50, 80, 90, 100 million, however many it is, people that were killed. Does that violate the rules? Are we allowed to counter the bourgeois narrative about what happened under Stalin, and that maybe 150 billion people didn't die? So what happens then? Does the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation throw a fit and start sending angry letters at anyone who points out the logical inconsistencies, the statistical inconsistencies, and the downright stupidity of some of the arguments that they make against communist history? Are they then going to turn around and deny the right to counter their lies to us? Where's the line? And I don't think that YouTube or capitalism in general is pro-Stalin in any way, so I think it's something we do have to worry about. But I think you see what I'm getting at. Where's the line of what's okay to challenge in history and what's not? Some things are very obvious, like claiming the Holocaust never happened is complete nonsense. But what about correcting blatant lies about Stalin? Is that against those same rules? And I think, as the left, that's where we should be concerned. Because I think that's going to be the problem that we're going to have to face. Because, I mean, as far as the bourgeoisie are concerned, or in the mainstream media, literally Stalin, evil person who ever existed, killed the multiverse, etc. And any questioning of that ridiculous narrative might be considered hate speech because you're denying some kind of history or crime. And I think that's something the left has to watch out about. Now, what about me personally? Now, one of the things you're not allowed to do is make fun of, say, national tragedies, maybe ones that you're supposed to never forget. Maybe there's some kind of huge thing in history that changed the world, even though in terms of world history it's actually pretty insignificant, that you personally, or I personally, find very funny, due to the very butthurt nature of the people who are upset about it happening. Are those kinds of jokes no longer allowed? Is a criticism, a rightful criticism of U.S. foreign policy boomeranging on the United States, the U.S. imperialist empire, is that now verboten as well? So you can see the problem here. Nobody really has a problem with saying, you can't spread hate speech about gays or ethnic minorities. I think we're all on board that hate speech is bad. But where does capitalism draw the line? Is it their opinion that matters most of all? Very much so. So does that mean criticisms of capitalism, or correcting the bourgeois narrative history of socialist countries, does that also violate the rules? And that's what, in the end, I think we have to worry about. So, maybe a new day on YouTube is upon us, and the rules have changed, and everything is going to be different. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see where things go from here. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what subjects become verboten and what ones do not. And one more example before I go. What if you decided to tackle this nonsense that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic? Now, I don't particularly support the Labour Party in the UK. I don't support bourgeois parties. But in fairness, Jeremy Corbyn is not an anti-Semite. That's very clear. That's a smear that's being used against him. And even expanded even further. What about criticisms of Israel? That's frequently labeled as hate speech, because you would have to be anti-Semitic to be against the genocide of Palestinians. Does that count? I mean, we already know there's legislation against boycott, divest, sanction movement. So saying, criticizing Israel, does that become officially anti-Semitism? Does that get censored? So I think that's pretty important as well. I think, like anything else that YouTube does, it's done behind closed doors by shareholders, policymakers, and lawyers. And the rest of us, those of us who have maybe given, like me, a decade of their life to this platform, are just going to have to sit back and see what happens. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.